Hello and welcome to our Google Hangout here from Lansing, Michigan. We are at Lansing Community College. My name is Kevin Gardner. I'm the State Director for Generation Opportunity here in Michigan. And Generation Opportunity is a national nonprofit organization. And we're committed to helping young people improve their lives. And right now there is an issue happening in Michigan and across the country that we as an organization are really concerned about. And that's called civil asset forfeiture. And so I've brought together a panel of guests to be able to talk about what's happening with civil asset forfeiture at the state level and at the federal level. So this evening I've got Congressman Tim Walberg with me and Jarrett Skorup with the Mackinac Center for Public Policy and Jenna Mall with Fix Forfeiture, which is a national group that is working to reform civil asset forfeiture right now. So Congressman Walberg, I'm just going to give a brief bio for you. Rep. Walberg has represented Michigan's 7th Congressional District since 2011. He serves on the House Education and Workforce Committee, chairing the Workforce Protection Subcommittee. In addition, he serves on the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee. And previously to being a member of Congress, Congressman Walberg served in the Michigan House of Representatives from 1983 to 1999. And he's been a leading voice to simplify our tax system, working with members of both parties to address the high cost of higher education and reform our healthcare and criminal justice system. So thanks a lot for being with us tonight, Congressman.
Good to be with you.
So, Congressman, first off, from John Oliver on HBO to the New York Times and Washington Post, this topic of civil asset forfeiture is gaining interest across the country. Can you explain in a simplified form what civil asset forfeiture looks like from a federal level and why young Americans should be concerned about this?
Well, I appreciate that opportunity. I think generally people want to trust their government. At least they'd like to. They like to have plenty of reason to do that. And civil asset forfeiture is a tool that can be used. But when it becomes a tool that encourages policing for profit, that soon starts to cause concern amongst people about what law enforcement is doing. And so when we've seen a number of things take place in recent years where law-abiding grocers, for instance, the Dacos in Michigan, the insurance company says we will not insure you if you have more than $10,000 cash receipts at your business at any time. So Mr. Daco dutifully puts the cash in the bag, takes it to the bank each day. All of a sudden the bank realizes these are fairly common deposits with a generally $10,000 denomination, and so law enforcement is notified of it. They come in, they stop him on the way with these receipts. They seize the assets he has. They freeze his assets in his bank, $35,000. And he spends the next almost a year trying to get his assets back, but also based upon the fact that he was never charged with anything.
Right.
He has to restore his credibility as well. Most recently, we had a young man who put together life savings of $16,000, wanted to go out to Hollywood, California, and get into motion picture production. On the way there, he stopped in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Law enforcement agents come on. Ultimately, long story short, his assets are taken from him, $16,000, and still attempting to get those assets back. He wasn't charged with anything. And so I think that's what's causing people to express concern about a tool that's used to get at genuine money laundering or drug pushing. But it's stepping into the lives of common ordinary citizens who are law-abiding, except for the fact that they are making deposits or have resources that can be seen by law enforcement agencies as something that would bring them in for civil asset forfeiture.
Absolutely. And so we're seeing stories just like that young man's all across our state and across the country. And you've been spearheading efforts at the federal level to try and change what's happening. What are you working on right now that can help curb civil asset forfeiture?
Well, we have legislation that we've introduced, and Rand Paul has co-sponsored that with me in the Senate. And it's legislation that will basically do a couple things. One, it will establish the same standard you have for criminal asset forfeiture. That means the proof is clear and convincing as opposed to simply a preponderance of evidence. Secondly, before any assets can be taken, a person has to be charged. You can't just say the resources are guilty. It has to be the person. So it again goes back to innocence till proven guilty concept, and that's America. That's what we want to see. It also does away with equitable sharing, which allows the feds and the locals to share the resources, which in many cases has encouraged from both sides the ability to look for sources like this that they can gain resources from through equitable sharing in civil asset forfeiture.
So can you tell me or explain to me why law enforcement says they need all this money from asset forfeiture? Why aren't they receiving money through normal budgetary process?
Well, that's the question. I mean, we really ought to be funding our police enforcement entities from the normal process. Tax dollars set with priority, and if the priority is in your community to provide good, stable law enforcement, to protect the law-abiding citizen and prosecute the violator of the law, then we ought to use the resources in a priority fashion that way. To give the law enforcement agencies a seeming requirement in order to give you the necessary resources to do your job, or to purchase in one police agency's situation, a Dodge Viper, so they could use that in the community enforcing and PR, or buy athletic uniforms. That's the wrong way to go. Find your dollars some other way. But in the meantime, let's have an entity of law enforcement that is trusted by the people, that does not have an incentive to police for profit, and then use the resources once they're adjudicated to be resources that were used in commission of a crime. Then those can be rolled into your law enforcement entity. But until then, let's make sure people's civil rights are protected.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we've seen is the Senate try to move forward on sentencing reform, but almost nothing's happened since August, and nothing has come from Senator Chuck Grassley's committee. Why is it that the Senate can't move this legislation, and what is the House doing?
Well, we fortunately had an opportunity to appear before the House Judiciary Committee 3 weeks ago and present our legislation to the committee. We're hoping that that will give impetus for them to take it up. I know there are several members of that Judiciary Committee, and I don't sit on that committee, who have some similar interests with this legislation. I'm hoping it's not the fact that they're simply holding it until they get their bills put together. Ours is ready. We have a lot of support, a lot of great organizations across the board in civil liberties and policy development, etc. The same would be true over in with Rand Paul in the Senate. We hope it's not the fact that you have presidential politics coming into it. And so I think talking about it like we're doing tonight, and having citizens, especially those in the younger community, who see this as an impact upon their life and their life for the future, would have a chance to say, stop now, don't go any further. Let's keep civil liberties key in our country. That's been a defining part of our American experience, that liberty that is given to ordinary citizens to pursue their life and not come under the gun of law enforcement agents who generally think of being there to protect us, not protect government. In this case, it's crossing the line. So I'm hoping that because we've had some interest like this and other entities, plus the opportunity to display our legislation in front of the Judiciary Committee in the House, that it can move forward.
And if you're able to move forward and achieve civil asset forfeiture reform, what other areas of the criminal justice system do you think can help foster trust between law enforcement and the community that you mentioned has really been lost through what we've seen happen in these raids where people go in and their homes are destroyed and their kids are terrified of police? So what other areas in criminal justice reform do you think we'll be able to touch on?
Well, I think this goes into the general area that let's make sure we do our homework first before we step into action. And I think that's what civil asset forfeiture has to grow into. It's a good concept. When you see a pattern that would lead you to believe that there may be some illicit activity going on, we'll follow that pattern. But make sure in the process of following the pattern, you've gone to the fullest degree to ascertain whether or not this person or this action is actually committing illegalities. The same would be involved with what we've seen with police officers now being encouraged to have body cameras on their police cruisers, to make sure that in both ways that they are protected from insinuation or charges that are false, and in turn they know that the world is watching, as it were, what they're doing, and they better achieve their responsibility in carrying it out with the highest degree of propriety and honesty in the process. So those are the things. And again, I would jump in, Kevin, quick and say the majority of police officers and law enforcement agencies, I don't think are abusing this power. But we've seen enough of it in Michigan and Texas and other parts of the country to say that it's worth taking a look at. And if it doesn't hurt our means of getting at real criminals, and we can further protect law-abiding citizens by doing some significant but really minor changes, why not do it?
Absolutely. So the point really of our Google Hangout this evening is to educate millennials about civil asset forfeiture, but then to also do something about it. We've got the legislation that you're working on. We've got legislation moving through the Michigan House and Senate right now. In your opinion, what can our viewers and young people that are passionate about reforming civil asset forfeiture do to help reform and end this very un-American practice?
Great. That's where we always want to get to. I appreciate that. Every one of your Google Hangout involvees tonight have the opportunity to contact their member of Congress. That could be me. I'd love to have emails. I'd love to have text messages. Instant messaging. We tweet anything you want to use. You can contact our office and say, we support your efforts. If it's another member of Congress, you can do the same thing, saying, we've just heard about civil asset forfeiture and a piece of legislation introduced by Representative Walberg and in the Senate, Senator Rand Paul. We want you to support that because we believe in liberty. And make it simple, make it short, but make it clear. I think the same is true in the State House and Senate. I'm delighted that the Michigan legislature has seen from our activity and then the subsequent involvement in the media that it's worth moving forward in Michigan, because we could pass them at the federal level, and that will restrict the federal agents from doing certain things, including equitable sharing. But the states have to involve themselves as well for it really to get into impact and working in society. So I can't think of a colleague of mine that doesn't use the social media from all forms. And those that are involved with this Google Hangout tonight know how to use that. Use it well. Don't give up. Do it passionately but politely. And then later on, maybe a few days later, follow up and see if they will give you a response to it. If you have an opportunity to go to a town hall meeting, I hold on average per the course of a term of office, 2-year term, 70 live town halls. If you hear of one of my town halls and you're in my district, come to it. I'd love to have some young faces there. If you're not in my district, there are other town halls that you can go to. Make contact. Our governmental system is really flowing right back into the new social connections we have, because it allows us to interact so easily, so quickly, and in many cases so completely, like it used to be. In the foundation of our governmental system, members of Congress weren't here all that long in Washington. They were back in their communities, and there were town halls, there were meetings in the local tavern, there was meetings in the church, you name it, and people gravitated toward making their wishes known. That can happen very easily now with the social media today.
Awesome. Well, we really appreciate you coming on and talking with us this evening. Here in Michigan, I'm going to be working hard with my team on the ground to be gathering petition signatures that we can deliver to lawmakers like you, making sure that we're making phone calls and knocking doors so that the millennial voice is heard on this, because it's a really serious issue. So thank you for your effort and all the work that you're doing to protect civil liberties in Congress.
Great, I appreciate it.
All right, I'm going to move on to Jarrett Skorup now. Jarrett is a policy analyst and digital engagement manager at the Mackinac Center for Public Policy. Jarrett is also the content manager for the Michigan Capital Confidential. Prior to his current position, Jarrett was a research associate at the Mackinac Center. Jarrett, can you recap for me what, in your idea, civil asset forfeiture is and why it exists and what is the problem here in Michigan?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me on, Kevin. So I think we should really clarify one thing in particular. There's two types of forfeiture that take place. There's criminal forfeiture and there's civil forfeiture. In the criminal system, the police would go through, they'd convict somebody of a crime, and then they would forfeit the property. They would take the property and send it over to the government. In the civil system, which is what we're talking about here, the government is able to take property from people, forfeit over to the government without actually convicting of a person of a crime or actually even charging them. The standard of evidence is much lower. So forfeiture isn't necessarily bad in itself. It's a way to get property, ideally, from people who are doing something harmful, drug dealers who are gaining vehicles and who are gaining houses or something like that, and transfer that property to recompensate victims. But civil forfeiture, when you do it through the civil system, where you can do it without actually ever charging someone or alleging a crime, that's where we end up having a big problem. And you're seeing these problems that happen in Michigan and lots of states in particular. And Michigan has one of the worst rated forfeiture laws in the state, in the country. So that's what we're working on.
Oops, sorry about that. That's right. The Institute for Justice gave the state of Michigan a D- in 2010 review of civil asset forfeiture laws. And the congressman gave us a good example. Do you have another example for our audience members of what civil asset forfeiture looks like in real life?
Yeah, sure. Michigan's seen its share of horror stories. So one of the worst examples that's sometimes cited is in the city of Detroit. In 2008, there were a bunch of millennials, a bunch of young people mostly, and they went to a get-together at an art museum. And they didn't realize that this art museum didn't have the proper liquor license to serve alcohol. So there was no allegation by police that these people were taking part in any criminal activity. They were all of age, the ones who were drinking, things like that. But the police entered, and they didn't ultimately end up charging people with a crime. But what they said was because the Art Institute was breaking the law, they were able to seize all the vehicles from the people who went to this party. And they seized those vehicles and they charged them, and they had to pay about $1,400 each in order to get their vehicles back from police, even though they were never actually charged or alleged to have participated in a crime. You had another situation in Wayne County a few years ago where a woman got picked up by her friend. She was working for the United Way, and the police alleged that she was a prostitute. It was a woman picking up another woman. They both were wearing their United Way badges, so it's very strange, and the police seized the vehicle, and they forfeited it over to the department. And then just this past year, we had an incident in West Michigan where the police seized a lot of the equipment, money, the cash, vehicles from some men in West Michigan, and they eventually alleged that these guys were involved kind of on the edge of the law for medical marijuana. But it took them over a year to end up charging one of the gentlemen and the other gentleman many, many months beforehand. So they were able to seize all their property and the proceeds that they would have been used, they could have used for a lawyer in order to defend themselves before ultimately charging them. So you see a lot of those situations.
So we talk about people's money and property being taken. How long does that take for people to get back, and what is the process for that?
Yeah, that's a great question because it gets to the heart of really kind of what the real problem is here in Michigan. So you do have, if police seize your property, you do have a system in which you can go back and try to prove before a judge that the property was not involved in criminal activity. However, you don't have a right to an attorney like you would in a criminal system. You don't have a right to a speedy trial or to a jury. You don't have a Miranda right because the police are not charging you with a crime. They're charging your property, which is with a crime, which is the civil system. So in Michigan, in that situation in Detroit with the people who went to the Art Institute, the police would go to them and say, okay, we'll get around to it. You can come down into Wayne County and you can challenge and you can get your vehicle back. However, if you're a young person and you have a vehicle worth $2,000, are you going to go spend $3,000 or $4,000 on an attorney in order to get your vehicle back? Probably not. That doesn't really make any sense. So what happened for most of those people, and this happens all the time, they just say, forget about it. It's not worth my time and money to go back to challenge to get a $2,000 vehicle back or to get $300 back or something like that. In Michigan, we have really poor transparency laws, so we don't actually know how much the property is worth that's typically being seized and forfeited. But if you look at a state like Minnesota, which has pretty good laws on this, transparency laws, the average amount of cash is only a few $100s. The average vehicle is only a little more than $2,000. So what you see is police are seizing stuff from people who really don't have the means to fight this, and often they don't fight it. So the government just ends up with the property.
Yeah, and just like you said, the Michigan police agencies reported $24.3 million in civil asset forfeitures in 2013, but that only includes the drug cases. And only 8% of agencies, actually 8% of agencies didn't file a report. So, and they're not even required right now to file those reports. So we really don't know how much they're seizing. And I think there are some reporting requirements in the new legislature that's moving, legislative bills that are moving through the legislature right now. Can you talk about that, what's happening with those bills?
Yeah, the House of Representatives passed some great transparency bills, and actually a bill that's pretty similar to what Congressman Walberg was talking about. It raises the standard of evidence that has to be presented. So right now we have the lowest standard of evidence possible, preponderance of the evidence, which is for when a person actually ends up challenging to get their property back. So it would raise that, and it would also require these good transparency bills. Every agency would have to report. They would have to say whether a person was charged with a crime. They'd have to say how much it was worth, and that would be really helpful. That would help lawmakers determine how much this is happening. It would help people know in their areas because, frankly, in Michigan, we know we have some pretty bad actors. We have some areas that are actually pretty good. They forfeit no money. We know that in Oakland County, in Michigan, voluntarily. Sheriff Bouchard down there, they have a higher standard of evidence, and they do much less forfeitures. But there are other areas in Wayne County and in parts of western Michigan where they do many more forfeitures. They're teaming up with the federal government a lot more. And admittedly, if you can talk to these sheriffs. They've admitted on the record that when they feel like they have a tight budget, they're doing more forfeitures. And that's understandable, but that's not really how we want to run our police systems. You don't want to do what Congressman Walberg mentioned, which is give policing for profit, give this incentive to go after people.
So we're seeing this legislation that it's kind of piecemeal to take a crack at civil asset forfeiture. Why aren't they introducing legislation to eliminate it completely? And who is really against this effort? Who would be against what's happening in our communities?
Mostly prosecutors, unfortunately. So the bills that they have, they're very good on the transparency. They are moving it along the right way. I think a part of this, and I'm sure Representative Walberg knows this, it's an educational problem. A lot of congressmen and legislators, it's a complicated legal issue to some extent. So they have to kind of have it explained to them, and of course, if they have prosecutors or sheriffs who are telling them that this is a really needed tool or something like that, that's a little bit harder to overcome. Our position on this is very simple. We do not want to make the lives of police officers on the ground more difficult. That's not what this is about. And police officers should always have the right to seize property on probable cause. They have that right now. But the actual act of forfeiture, which is transferring property from a person to the government, the position of the Mackinac Center and of the groups that we're working with is that should only be done after you actually convict someone of a crime. And so that's ultimately what we want to see. And we're hopefully to get closer to that goal. But for right now, we're hopeful the bills that were passed in the House were passed bipartisan, overwhelmingly, very few votes against. And they're over in the Senate now, so I think it's a little bit of an educational issue, and hopefully that's something they take up, and if people care about the issue, that's who they should be contacting.
Yeah, and right along those lines, who they should be contacting, you're a millennial, I'm a millennial, what should our peers be doing to really get out there and take a crack at trying to help pass these bills that are moving through the legislature right now?
Well, the transparency bills and really just an overall good package of bills, they should talk to their senators because that's where it's sitting, and it's sitting in the Senate Judiciary Committee, and they should just really, I mean, in Michigan we got a lot going on right now. We got a lot with the road funding that's sucking up a lot of oxygen. So I'm not saying that they're purposely avoiding this or something like that, but it is a lower priority issue for legislators if they don't hear about something. So just by hearing about it from people saying that this is something they care about, the civil rights of people, that would be helpful, and that's something that you should be doing for your legislators on any issue that you actually care about.
Okay, awesome. Well, thanks a lot for joining us, Jarrett, and I look forward to working with you on this issue. All right, we're going to move now over to Jenna Mal. Jenna is with the Fix Forfeiture organization, and she's an attorney with broad experience and successful state policy initiatives and strategy. Most recently, Jenna worked with the Pew Charitable Trust, leading comprehensive juvenile justice policy initiatives, and previously served the Center for Effective Justice at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, researching and educating policymakers on a variety of policy initiatives across the country. Jenna, thank you for being with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So can you tell me about what Fix Forfeiture is and what their involvement is for trying to reform civil asset forfeiture in Michigan and across the United States?
Absolutely. And before I do that, if I can just thank the Congressman for his leadership on these issues. It's his hard work that has made a group like Fix Forfeiture even possible to begin with. He's shed light on this issue, and he's really paved the way for very meaningful reforms. So Fix Forfeiture is a new organization, and it's made up of 7 of the most influential public policy and advocacy organizations across the country. But what's interesting about Fix Forfeiture is that those 7 organizations are they're bipartisan, and they have 7 of the most different political viewpoints that you could possibly imagine. Yet they agree on this one issue. They might disagree on everything else, and they'll actually tell you they disagree on everything else. But on criminal justice, and specifically on asset forfeiture, they see the need for reform. They want to fix this system to make sure that it adheres to constitutional principles, that it protects innocent people's civil liberties, and yet maintains this tool for law enforcement in appropriate circumstances.
Absolutely. And along those bipartisan lines, what do you think is going to prevent this legislation from passing or reforms happening to civil asset forfeiture? We're at a historic point where it seems like everybody's agreeing that this is an egregious practice that shouldn't be taking place. What is stopping the reforms from going through?
Honestly, the biggest thing that's necessary right now, and the most important thing for everyone out there today, is just as the congressman had mentioned, we need to get people contacting their legislators and telling them how important this issue is for them. The only thing that can really derail this, both in Michigan and at the federal level and in all of the states that are looking at this issue, and I should say that fixed forfeiture is engaged with several states, and a lot of states are looking to fix their systems. But the only thing that could derail this issue is if the idea gets out there that it's not a big deal. It only affects a couple of people. You know, there's these anecdotes out here, and no one really cares enough. We need to show our legislators how much we care and how important this issue is to us, and making sure that our criminal justice system is fair and its resources are focused on true criminals. If we can do that, and if we can show our legislators that it's time for them to make this policy change, I think that we're going to see a lot of success.
Can you tell us where you've seen successful reforms take place across the country and what that looks like?
Absolutely. So just this year, both New Mexico and Montana passed comprehensive legislation reforming their civil asset forfeiture systems. And the two things that are similar in both of those states is that it was done on a bipartisan basis. It's everyone working together, coming up with a solution to fix this problem, and really putting aside their political differences to make our criminal justice system work just a little bit better. In fact, in New Mexico, their legislation was passed unanimously. Every single legislator in New Mexico saw the need for reform. Both states moved the process to be post-conviction. So what that means is that law enforcement can continue to seize your property when they feel that there might be the chance that it's connected to criminal activity. However, they can't forfeit it, they can't actually own it until a criminal court has convicted somebody of a crime. And that's really important for all of the reasons that have been discussed today. We want to make sure that we are using the criminal court system and that we're using the legal protections therein to focus this tool on true bad actors. New Mexico went one step further than Montana did by taking the proceeds from asset forfeitures, and instead of sending them directly to law enforcement, they'll now go to the general fund. The legislature then has the power, as it always does, to use those funds for law enforcement or for any other measure that the legislature sees fit.
Absolutely. So you talked a little bit about how young Americans can get involved in contacting their legislators. What else do you think, what kind of time and commitment, what else can they do to get involved in this reform movement?
Sure. Well, I think it's really important to talk about this because, when you say to someone, if you just met someone on the street and you told them that law enforcement right now has the ability to seize and forfeit your property without convicting you of a crime, without charging you with a crime in many cases, you don't have access to a court system, you have to go and prove it innocent, people would be really shocked by this. I think they would be really shocked. And so the more people that know about this, the more people that understand what's happening, I think that we're going to really see some monumental changes on this. So I would really encourage everyone out there today to start sharing this issue with your friends and with your family, start talking about it on social media like the congressman had suggested. Let's make sure that everyone is aware of what's going on, and let's make asset forfeiture work for our country and for our criminal justice system once again.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And thanks to all of our panelists for being with us this evening. You can follow along and find Generation Opportunity at generationopportunity.org. You can follow the Michigan Twitter account at genopmi. And I look forward to working with all of the activists in our state on the ground to gather petition signatures and call our state legislators and make sure that we get this legislation passed. So thank you all for being with us, and we will see you at our next event.
Thank you.